This is kind of a almost midpoint of the program. We have webinars today and next week, and then we'll go 3 weeks into talking to providers with each of the counties where the Benton and Reid consulting team act as ombudsman for the communities as we reach out and talk about not only whether providers have applied for Wave 1 funding in Connect Illinois 4, or whether they plan to apply for Wave 2 funding. So that is kind of where we are, and then we'll all come back together at the end and do a final presentation, which really focuses on what you all have learned. We, of course, will help you through that process so that you don't have to get out there and present a big PowerPoint or anything at the end. But this, as I said, is a really special day for me personally because I have three of my favorite broadband people on the call today. And the first person that is going to talk is Gigi Sohn. She is a Benton Senior Fellow, but also Executive Director of the AAPB, the American Association of Public Broadband. Thank you, Gigi. I always all these acronyms, but she's going to talk about the various models that are available for communities to consider and is an expert on this topic as well as an extraordinary public advocate for the public interest in this country. And so she's the first speaker. She'll be followed by Kevin Klein from Vantage Point. We got acquainted. I think, Kevin, you and I met over drinks at a conference one time, and I
Yeah,
just
it was a really in-depth, highly informative conference that we were at. It wasn't over drinks.
yeah, I liked it. But anyway, I think we ended up getting into a bar. But what I discovered is Kevin has worked all throughout Illinois, mostly helping small providers, in many cases, small telephone co-op providers, but a wide variety of people to really get ready to apply for funding from a variety of different entities, both state and federal. And so he'll talk a little bit about that process. You all should know that the Reid Consulting Group also does this kind of work. And there are a bunch of consultants that we have either worked with or are familiar with, so that if you ever got to that point of wanting to do that kind of work, you could come and we'd give you a list. Finally, Jesse Shackleton, I can say without a doubt, is my favorite broadband provider in Illinois. And I do mean that because I think Jesse, as one of the few electric co-ops that got into the broadband business a while ago, is a community broadband player, as Gigi will tell you, as she defines that. And what I love about Jesse's firm, Joe Carroll, Energy or JCE, is that they are very community minded and they're constantly looking at ways to improve their relationship with the community, be responsive to community needs. But beyond that, Jesse's become an advocate for broadband in the state, including maybe you'll spend a minute talking about this, Jesse, about a bill that you have tried to put in front of the legislature to make it easier to build broadband networks in this state. And he's also appeared in front of congressional committees to talk about the work he's done. So I'm super proud of the three people we have on this call today. And without further ado, Gigi, I'm going to turn it over to you. At the end, please stay on because Reid, I know if you have any housekeeping, we should make sure to let people aware of that. Okay, Gigi, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Adrienne. I am delighted to be here today and delighted to talk about one of my favorite topics, public broadband, and want to talk about the various and sundry options there are and also opportunities. I understand that there are a number of counties in Illinois that are getting more and more interested in this model. It's not one model, it's many models. We'll talk about that. And I don't know if folks know Amanda Barrett at Vivacity, but I know she's been talking to a number of groups. She does most of her work in Michigan, but she's also talking to folks in Illinois. So part of my goal here is to try to convince folks on this call that if you've not already looked at the public broadband model, that you might want to. Next slide, please. So what is public broadband? It's a lot of different things. As I said, it's different business models, which we'll talk about. But the one thing that sort of ties it all together is community ownership of the infrastructure. Okay, and sometimes it's the middle mile, sometimes it's the last mile, sometimes it's both. But the common thread again is community ownership, and that includes co-ops because co-ops are owned by members of the community. So, but that's the thing that really kind of ties this all together. And AEPB has been around for about a year and a half, and it's a membership organization that does three things. It tries to promote public broadband by providing the tools for communities that want to build these networks. It spends a lot of time, I'm afraid, defending public broadband from attacks, particularly by dark money groups. We'll talk about that later. And also tries to ensure fair access to federal and state broadband funds. So we were very active in trying to get alternatives to the letter of credit requirement for BEAD. We also tried to get municipal networks to be exempt from the letter of credit requirement. That didn't work. But basically, we want community networks to be able to operate on a level playing field and not be hobbled by economic or legal or political barriers. We are a membership organization. I urge folks that if you're interested in this issue to please join us. It's not that expensive, and we survive by membership fees. So please do consider joining. Next. So this is a map. If folks don't know the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, they're a very close partner of ours. We've been doing joint programming with them. It's a great group. They're, I would say, less of an advocacy group and more of an informational group. If you go to their community networks website, basically they have a list of every single community network build that has happened, that is going to happen, that people are thinking about. But right now, there are almost 800 communities that have a community-owned network. And there, again, that includes co-ops, that includes, retail services, it includes the various business models that I'll be talking about. So this has grown by 100, I think, in the last like 6 months. So this is a model that is taking off for reasons we'll discuss in a little bit. Next slide. So what are the benefits of public broadband? And I will talk about, I don't think there's any downsides, but there are some challenges. I used to work at the Ford Foundation. We always talked about challenges and opportunities. Okay, so what are the opportunities here? Is number one, you can connect every household with affordable, robust broadband rather than have to worry about, as private incumbent broadband providers do, to have to worry about maximizing return on investment. So it is really a public interest utility, like electricity, like water. Second is robust, affordable broadband. It attracts young residents and businesses. It's good for the town. It's good for the city. It grows the tax base. Same, it helps libraries, schools, and healthcare institutions do their job better. And finally, and I think this is important, I would say that bullet points 2, 3, and 4 really all kind of go together about how it actually can improve your city or town. It allows a community to become smart. So you can monitor and control traffic. You can monitor and control the energy grid. You can monitor crime and respond to it. You can monitor weather conditions and environmental conditions. And ultimately, this saves a community millions of dollars. So, people look at the challenge is when people look at the initial price tag, they freeze up. They're like, oh my God, we can't afford this. And I'll talk later about ways to finance. But the price tag is not cheap, but ultimately it pays for itself. Next slide. So I talked about there's basically 4 public broadband business models. So the first is what I call pure municipal networks. So these are local governments providing broadband service to residents. And there's basically two models within that is number one, you have local governments that for years have had existing utilities, usually electric utilities, sometimes, gas or water utilities, and they find it pretty simple to expand to broadband. So some examples of those, the sort of the example that's used all the time, one of the most popular and frankly most successful is in Chattanooga, Tennessee, the Electric Power Board, EPB, Wilson, North Carolina, Frankfort, Kentucky, Lafayette, Louisiana. And, again, those are highly successful. They had to scratch and claw their way to make that happen, again, because of opposition from incumbent broadband providers, but they're very, very successful. And the take rates are like amazing. They're like, I think in Frankfurt, it's something like 79%. It's amazingly popular, and they make money from it, right? And the money goes back into the community. The second kind of municipal networks are when a community builds a broadband utility from scratch. Now, those are rare, I would say, but they're also highly successful. FAR Texas, Sandy, Oregon, Fair Lawn, Ohio. Again, they have FAR Texas in 2019 was named the worst connected city in the country. Jacksonville, Illinois. Thank you. Please put more examples in the chat. I would appreciate that greatly because I'm going to reach out to them and get them to be members, hopefully. I think FAR Texas in 2019 was considered the worst connected city in the country, and now it's one of the best. And again, the take rates are well over 50% for each one of these. Second is public-private partnerships. And this is where a community doesn't want to be an ISP. And you can understand why, right? I mean, it's customer service and, it's having to, keep incredible data, and it's having to fix the network when it's broken. And it's funny, a friend of mine runs a fixed wireless network down in Eastern North Carolina. It's not a community network. And she basically has, her phone rings 24 hours a day because she's like the customer service person. Some communities don't want to do that. It's understandable. Okay. In other cases, state law prohibits communities from running an ISP, or they say, well, we don't prohibit communities from running an ISP, but you just can't make any money from it, which is like, of course, the same thing. So what they do is they partner with a private ISP. The community still owns the infrastructure, but the private ISP provides the service, and they work out an arrangement to determine who makes what money. So some of the examples are Holly Springs, North Carolina partners with Ting. I happen to be on the board of 2Cals, which is the parent company of Ting, so just in full transparency. Bountiful, Utah, which partners with Utopia, which is a very, very well-known, mostly middle mile open access provider, but also is doing last mile services. Huntsville, Alabama, where the partnership is with the city and Google Fiber or G Fiber, and a bunch of Maine communities which partner with GWI or Great Works Internet. So these are all communities that partner with private entities, but again, they own the infrastructure, and that's what's key. Next slide, please. More public broadband business models. I just talked about open access networks. So there are, again, there are business models within the business models. So open access could be everything from a company like Utopia provides the middle mile, and last mile providers provide everything else. Open access can be the community provides everything, including the drop to the home, and a private provider will then provide connectivity to the individual. So there are a whole bunch of different models for open access, but what ties them together again is that there are multiple providers, there's no discrimination, and it's the same price for the same service. And again, some examples, I talked about Utopia. Westminster, Maryland has an open access network, which I will say it only has one ISP that provides service. That's Ting. And that's not because it's not open. It's because Westminster is 75 miles west of Baltimore, has nothing but cornfields and 10,000 people. So it's not that attractive. On the other hand, Ammon, Idaho, which also is a very small community, has a dozen providers that work in its open access system. Shelburne, New York is another example of open access. And again, that's open access to the home. The next model is called communications union districts or public utility districts. And these are in Vermont and Washington State. I know Michigan is looking at doing something similar. What they are is basically a bunch of small communities gather together and build infrastructure. So you can imagine in Vermont where you've got all these tiny little communities. I think there's something like 20, I don't know the exact number, something like 23 or 24 of these communications union districts where communities join together. And like I said, I know there are a number of counties in Michigan that are considering doing something similar. And obviously what it does is it gathers resources from a whole bunch of different places where it may be prohibitive for one community to build their own. They join forces with neighboring communities, and it's been wildly successful in both of those states. And finally, we talked about co-ops. Community members own the assets. They're all over the country, largely in rural areas. And although we're starting to see some new co-ops, not necessarily in rural areas, pop up. And again, what's great about this is actually the members of the community own the assets and control universality and robustness and what have you. Next slide, please. So I mentioned before that the thing that kind of makes people flip out about this business model is the cost. So a year ago, February, I spent 3 days in Cape Cod where there was 8 inches of snow. I did 5 speaking events because there were several communities that were really, really hot to trot to build community broadband out there because all they had was Comcast. Okay, and these are wealthy areas. And I was working with one town called Falmouth, which had about 35,000 residents in it, and it was going to cost something in the neighborhood of about $35 million to build the network. And they begged off, which I thought was unfortunate. To their, good for them, Verizon came in, so at least they have um, some competition, but it's really not the same, right? When you own the infrastructure, you get to control who gets the broadband, whether it's robust or not, and you can command an affordable price for it. So, or at least an affordable price for low-income communities. So there's something about having control that really makes sure that everybody gets a good deal. So how do we finance public networks? There's a variety of ways. There are, and I don't want to get into the details because I'm going to point you to a place where you can find out a lot more information. There are various and sundry municipal bonds, general obligation bonds, and revenue bonds. I can talk about them a little bit more if you'd like. There are what we call CDFIs or community development financial institutions. I talked about FAR Texas, which is a pretty poor community. That's where a CDFI came in and provide a lot of the financing. More and more philanthropy is getting interested in helping. And then, of course, there are local, state, and federal grants. The communications union districts that I talked about before in Vermont are seeking grants from the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Fund, or BEAD fund. Hopefully that money will come through one day. So there are a variety of ways without having to increase taxes. I mean, some communities, do include, general tax revenue in these bonds. So it's not, or at least the general tax revenue backs up the bonds. So it's not costless for the taxpayer, but most communities, I would say almost all communities, have been able to finance these networks without having to increase taxes. So there are ways of doing this, obviously, depending on what your bond rating is and what kind of community you have. There are different levels of ability. So one of the counties I'm working with in Michigan includes Flint, Michigan. Flint, Michigan is not going to, put out bonds for their community to buy. They're going to have to find some other way to finance the network. So let's move on. So if you wanted to learn more information, Benton and AAPB put together this handbook, and there's the URL right there, Own Your Internet, How to Build a Public Broadband Network. And it really talks about the questions you need to ask yourself and the steps you need to take if you actually want to do this. AAPB is there as a resource, and we have technical assistance if anybody is really interested. But this handbook, it's about what, 30 some odd pages long, really kind of answers a lot of the basic questions about how can I build my own broadband network. Next page, please. So I talked about the threats to public broadband. 16 states have laws that either limit or prohibit communities from choosing the broadband network that best serves the needs of their communities. Minnesota just repealed their limitations last year. Colorado did the year before. So we're chipping away. But the best way to get rid of those 16 state restrictions is for folks in those states to kind of rise up and say, and go to their state legislature and say, you're killing, economic development in our communities. Illinois, thankfully, does not have restrictions. It is kind of ironic, though. I don't want to go back to the map that I showed you at the beginning. But there's a lot of public broadband in states that have restrictions. And communities have just figured out a way to get around them, or some of those networks were built before the restrictions were passed. In the early part of the century, that's when the incumbent providers, cable and broadband providers, got a lot of these laws passed. It is funny that in a lot of the states that don't have restrictions, I would include Illinois among them, there's not a lot of build, which is somewhat surprising to me, but I think that may change. The second threat, and this is one I spend an awful lot of time dealing with, are dark money campaigns funded by big cable and telecom. I just had an op-ed in the Minnesota Star Tribune or Minneapolis Star Tribune, pushing back against the Freedom Foundation of Minnesota, which doesn't want to give communities the freedom to choose the best broadband for their residents. I just had an op-ed there pushing back on that. You don't know who funds these people. The thing is, when the big cable operators push back on public broadband builds in their own name, they just get laughed out of the room. So what they do is they give money to these groups with anodyne names like the Alliance for Quality Broadband, the Domestic Policy Caucus. You see them on the screen, hoping that they can convince residents to basically not build these networks. It never works. And I think they're best defeated when groups are asked, who funds their campaigns. So this happened in Cape Cod as well. The Domestic Policy Caucus has a subgroup called Mass Priorities, and they just all of a sudden started pushing back because they knew that Falmouth was interested in building public broadband. And I got a reporter in the local newspaper to just ask them, who funds you? And their answer was, I don't need to tell you, which is not particularly convincing. But every place, I think, there have been attacks since in the year and a half I've been running the organization in about 8, 9 states. And whenever we ask these groups who funds you and they won't tell you, it kind of undermines them. Next slide, please. So here are things to consider when, if you're interested in possibly, building a public broadband network. Number one is we don't know what the future of BEAD is. And really, it's only going to cover the most rural areas, even if the BEAD funding is released. And even if the BEAD funding does land up going mostly to fiber as opposed to just satellite, or mostly to satellite, which is, that's one of the rumors going around, is that the Commerce Department is going to change the rules to basically mandate a price per location that would almost guarantee that Elon Musk gets 50% of the money. I hope that doesn't happen. Benton and others are pushing back on that, but we just don't know what the future of BEAD is. And frankly, again, if you live in a suburban or an urban area, it's not going to help you anywhere. So, is everyone in your community being served? And again, not just with broadband of a type, but something that allows them to do remote education, remote work, telehealth. And is it affordable? I mean, all the discussion over deployment really kind of leaves in the dust the whole discussion over affordability. I don't want to get into the details of that. I've worked very hard to try to get the Affordable Connectivity Program back and try to get the FCC to do the right thing with the Universal Service Fund. I have not succeeded in either endeavor, but it's not enough just to have the pipe. It's got to be affordable and it's got to be able to do the things that one needs to do in a modern society. The second thing to consider, are the incumbent broadband providers providing what you need? In some cases, they are. I'm not going to sit here and say that public broadband is for every single community. In some community, they actually have some competition now. But are the incumbents providing what your community needs? And what is your responsibility to its residents with regard to broadband? I mean, is it necessary to enable all those things I talked about before? Education, healthcare, economic empowerment, civic engagement, so on and so forth. And what is the community's responsibility to itself? I mean, is it worth the investment to make a city smarter? I would argue that ultimately the investment not only pays for itself, but it goes beyond that and produces a revenue stream. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say every single community broadband build is successful. You may have just read in San Bruno, California, they just sold their system, and it's a cable system, which probably tells you everything you need to know, to Comcast. Okay, so occasionally, like private entities, occasionally public broadband fails. But if you finance it correctly, if you set it up right, and you provide the kind of connectivity that people need today, I think the chances are, as we see from the enormous growth of public broadband, that it will succeed. Okay, next. I think that's it. So I'm open for questions. How much time, Reid, do I have for questions?
Yeah, we can take probably 5-10 minutes here.
Okay, great. I prefer if people raise their hand rather than put in the chat. I'll see if I can.
I can read the first question,
Okay, go
Gigi.
ahead. Yeah.
It says many feel public broadband could foster in migration because it attracts both visitors and residents, while others fear investing in public broadband due to population decline, aka increased per capita cost slash subscriptions. Any myths or nuances with these considerations? Do you think communities should invest in public broadband regardless of population trends?
Well, I think what we've seen in those communities that have built robust public broadband networks is that people move to them. Chattanooga is like, again, the absolute best example of a city that was, an industrial city that was dying until they bought in, gigabit broadband, and now it's like a robust southern city with lots of folks. I think the risks are less that you'll lose people, and the chances are more that you'll actually gain people if you have that connectivity. Also brings in, it also helps with tourists. I mean, so many people, and this started COVID really, like they moved away for a month or two, and I'm seeing this from, maybe it's my privileged status, but people like, go away for, a month and because they can work remotely. So it's not only good for residents, it's also good for tourism as well.
Well, that's interesting, Gigi. We had a county in the last broadband breakthrough who had a big lake that was getting 2 million visitors a year, but it had no broadband. And so it started to become an issue with people who were visiting. And so the county really looked at this as an economic development. I will also add, just going back to the public benefit with Chattanooga, during the pandemic, they essentially offered free broadband to 40,000 students in their school system because it was a public, it is a public utility in Chattanooga. So during that very, bad time, to be able to bring school kids the internet they needed to stay safe was a big deal.
Yeah.
Any other questions that people want to ask? Thank you, Nancy. That was a very good question, I thought. Very subtle.
And if Reid, if you could also send everybody my email, because if people have questions, Like I said, I know that Alexis Shruby is working with Amanda Barrett. I assume most people know Alexis. I
He's
don't.
on the call,
Oh,
actually.
she is okay. To try to gin up interest in Illinois in this model. Like I said, it takes leadership. I mean, you basically have two different kinds of leadership that kind of causes a public broadband network to happen. Is either you kind of get like the city councilman or the mayor or the, sort of government leader who has a wild hair and who kind of leads the way, or as in Bountiful, Utah, it comes from the grassroots where members of the community say, we need this and we need it now. And that pushed the city council to vote on a 5-0 basis to to adopt public broadband. And also beat back a really well-funded dark money campaign to try to stop it.
I have a question if there are none others from the chat or participants, just on kind of where we are right now, since there's uncertainty regarding BEAD, but even if BEAD were to proceed as the law is written, um, what kind of advice do you have for communities that are weighing a public broadband option, but also have significant rural areas that BEAD will cover by, any number of providers applying for funds?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to think of what are your different options? Definitely apply for BEAD funding.
Yeah.
There was a hope at the when the bipartisan infrastructure bill was being developed, at least the Biden administration had hoped to kind of give public broadband, community broadband a leg up, right? Basically a preference. That didn't happen, not surprisingly, when the bill finally came out. But public broadband entities not only uh, are can apply for these grants, they cannot be discriminated against. So there's no downside other than the time and energy it takes to apply for a grant. And I know in Minnesota, a number of communities are building from ARPA grants, right? The American Rescue Plan grants, the $10 billion that the Treasury Department gave out. So there's no reason why not to at least try for it, but understand you may not get it, see what the options are. And in
You
the back of
know,
the handbook, by the way, we have a whole bunch of resources of, folks you could talk to about financing, folks you could talk to about public-private partnerships. So, there are a lot of resources out there that folks that you could just talk to get ideas about, how you might go about this. And again, I think what's really important, a lot of communities are looking at the public-private partnership idea because they don't want to build their own, right? I mean, they don't want to run their own. They want to own it and be able to control who gets it at what price, but they don't necessarily want to build it. So there are kind of turnkey ways that you can build build a public broadband network, but understanding it isn't, I'm not going to bullshit you. It's not cheap.
actually, I want to point out that one of our counties, Logan County, led by a very, very smart and aggressive woman named Kathy Brown, who went through several of our programs with the county she controls under the Greater Peoria EDC, received a grant from Connect Illinois 3 to build a fiber backbone in Logan County, which could serve as a way for retail providers to reach into their county. And of course, there are a lot of reasons to be involved in owning a fiber backbone. There's another county, Ogle, that went through the Benton program that felt that having a fiber ring in their county was going to allow better emergency services and other things that the county itself would have use for, and then could be used for retail broadband. So there are examples of counties that have taken the step to own or enhance their current emergency services networks. And I know yesterday we had the sheriff's department on, sometimes for Lake County. Sometimes there are public safety reasons for people to be involved in trying to strengthen those networks, as Gigi said, as a kind of first step. And that really does justify sometimes the investment by having all of these various public uses building off that middle mile.
Yeah, there's another question in here about any considerations for communities without bonding power to invest in broadband. Again, I think this is where you have to look for local, state, do you have an economic development, uh, you know, uh, uh, a committee or something like that that gives money. This look at local and regional philanthropy.
Correct.
Look at, CDFIs if it's a poorer community. So it's not ideal. The bonding is the way that most of these communities do it, but there are other options.
Thank you, Gigi, for your time today. Super appreciate it. I will say Gigi takes anybody's call, and I really appreciate that about how accessible she is, how well connected in Washington to the people who run these programs. Worked at the Federal Communications Commission for a long time, and her job was outreach to the public interest and other communities that were interested in the work that was happening at the FCC. So very knowledgeable. And again, Gigi, thank you so much for your time today. So we're going to turn it over now to Kevin from Vantage Point. Kevin, you're going to run your own slides, right?
I think Reid's got him.
Okay, Reid, go for it.
The first one.
And again, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the opportunity to Adrian and Reid and the Benton Institute for the opportunity to speak. I think I've presented to every cohort, even before they were pulled into cohorts. Also, I say this every time I speak, I will not win any prizes for being a super polished speaker and this outstanding presenter, but you will get a lot of very candid thoughts from me. And then I'll also acknowledge that the Packer helmet over my shoulder. So I live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but I do spend a lot of time in Illinois, and you'll see that here very clearly. This first slide, just from a perspective of people on the Alexis says "Go Pack Go." All right, I'll chime in on that. From the perspective of the audience, just understand who Vantage Point is. We are a full-blown engineering and consulting firm for critical infrastructure. Obviously, in this case, we're talking about broadband, and that slide kind of runs through a quick run of the survey or the services we offer. The ones to kind of pay attention to, and I'll touch on briefly as we go through here. The first three on feasibility and funding, network design and engineering, outside plan to network implementation. Jesse will talk about that a little bit as well. And then if you skip a box, the regulatory compliance piece. So I'll talk about that here in a little bit, but we don't need the full-blown commercial. Reid, if you want to go to the next slide. And this, just by the numbers, just to give you some perspective, we just recently crossed over $3.5 billion of funding we've secured for our clients. In Illinois, there's been the 3 rounds of Connect Illinois. In the first round, every submission we did in the first round was awarded. The second round, I was trying to remember this morning, I candidly can't remember. In the third round, the most recent round of Connect Illinois, we did north of 20 applications and all but 2 were awarded. And those 2 that weren't awarded, I think our clients would tell you they were kind of throwing the spaghetti at the wall to see if it would stick. Both 100% full grant requests. But the point being, we've done a lot of work on the grant requests nationally, whether it's state, local, regional programs. But I think that it is significant for the people on the call. This last round of Connect Illinois, we had 5 different client types that were awarded. We had commercial telco, cooperative telco, fiber overbuilders, just pure overbuilders, Jesse and some electric cooperatives we work with, electric cooperatives that are, cooperative models, but new to them as it's a new infrastructure being broadband as opposed to electric or gas. And then we also work with, if some of you on the call may know Suburban, the Central Illinois Regional Broadband Network, we did their application. So kind of a quasi-governmental partnership arrangement. So the interesting thing there is just the breadth of client types we've worked with. I know the attendees on the call come from various different backgrounds, but I feel highly confident, regardless of what your position is, we probably work with a model similar to that before. The other one's just for again, understand who we are. 15 PEs over 40 states. We do 10,000 miles and plus of construction management. 4 attorneys on staff, although we're not licensed in Illinois. And we're just south of 600 employees now, but I think it's good to know that we do have an office in Springfield. We actually facilitate the Universal Service Fund in Illinois. And I myself personally, I sit on the Illinois Broadband and Telecom Association Board of Directors as the vendor member representing the vendor community. So that's the commercial. The good, if you want to switch to the next slide, and this is kind of the Kevin's my opinion story, but it kind of holds true. There's two questions on there that you want to ask ahead of time is, are you really underserved? And this kind of Gigi pointed this out about how if you're in a metropolitan or suburban area, you're probably served by definition of served, but are you really underserved? Is it anecdata or real data? Are you, I think what we've seen candidly, we've worked with a lot of communities and counties where yes, they've got poor service. There's no doubt about that. I agree 100%. I myself in Milwaukee, I live in a nice neighborhood in Milwaukee, and I've got two providers just to make sure that one of them works so I can be on a call like this, right? But that whether you're served or underserved can make it challenging in terms of going after money. And then on the community surveys piece, the research that I added in there, that again, this follows up a little bit on what Gigi said. If you're in a community that's arguably well served by a map, but underserved by what you're hoping to accomplish, you may be able to dig that out through some surveys and local research. I would never advocate for you to create another broadband map. I think you just create another bad map, but you do want to find out what your goal is. Like Gigi said, do you want to have provider choice? Are you working for advanced services? Maybe you want to offer community-based Wi-Fi, but understand, what's your goal there on that part? And then the second part of the slide, the go solo or partner, can you do it on your own? That's not easy. I'm echoing Gigi's thought, but she's seen a lot. I've seen it a lot. I think there's a lot of people that, although right-minded, it's a big task. That's why a lot of the community union districts in Vermont, and we work with in Vermont as an example, we've worked with the union district that builds the network, and we've also worked with a provider that's using that network that community union district built. So they've at least identified that, hey, it's a bigger animal than we wanted to. But find out if you can do it on your own. And then the part about do you want to find a partner? And I've mentioned this out to all the cohorts. I think there's a lot of folks locally that say, hey, I've called Kevin's Broadband locally, and he's not interested. Well, because he's next door. Well, if you draw a circle on the map, and I'm going to talk about this again as well, about this circle on the map, but if you draw a circle on the map, don't just look at the providers that might be right next door. Maybe there's a provider that's 50, 100 miles away that says, boy, I sure would like to go into Bugsville, Illinois, but I just can't get there. But if you just draw a circle on the map and only contact those providers near you, and it sounds like Adrian, like I think you said the next three weeks you're going to talk to the providers themselves, cast a very wide net on who those providers might be. You might find that Kevin's Broadband is like, boy, I'd love to get there. I just didn't know what the interest was. Maybe you've done a survey that you can provide to me as a provider to say, hey, here's how much interest there is in a second choice. But look, I mean, I don't want to belabor this too much, but look further away than you may have felt comfortable looking further away. Also, to tag on to the Chattanooga model, we've worked with a number of municipal utilities that your municipal utility, if they're not putting fiber in already, they will be, certainly. I went round and round with a board director in Pennsylvania. This was last summer. I told her we were a broadband engineering firm, and she said, oh, we're not interested in broadband. That's fine. Well, I'm not here to evangelize or tell you you have to be in broadband, but you will be in communications for sure. You will have fiber going to your substations. You'll have fiber network. Every electric provider is getting to a smarter grid. You probably hear the term smart grid mentioned a lot, whether it's smart grid or grid resiliency. There's a lot of things coming. So if you're a municipal utility, that keep that fiber broadband on your list of things that you want to talk to with your providers. Reid, if you want to just step to that last slide. And I will be candid here as well. I'm jamming a year's worth of discussions into a 10-minute presentation. I'm just kind of giving you some highlights on some things you're going to want to think about. The area of interest, that's the part I mentioned about drawing a circle. When we're working with clients that want to go after some grant funding or just see what's out there, they draw that circle too small. Like, oh, we're really interested in this. No, take that circle and draw it twice as big as you think. Look at everything that's out there that you might possibly want to get to. And I say this all the time. Start with yes and work to no. start with, yes, we're going to go there, and adjust that circle in your model to get to something that will work. Maybe it's a funding and feasibility reason. Maybe there's more competition there than you realize, but start bigger and work smaller. Don't start with a little area and then kind of try to branch out. That's, again, the Kevin opinion, but that's generally where we start with all of our clients. But in that same breath, and this goes to my previous slide, keep in mind what your goal is. Are you just trying to do the underserved areas, or maybe there's a business park area that you want to help grow, but take a look at that area of interest. And then that next step that comes out of that big circle is what's your real number? How much will it cost? Gigi said that in Cape Cod, they said they flipped out, if I heard you correctly. What we've learned going through a number of these cohorts is, I think some people have thought, well, that must be a $2 million or $3 million deal. And almost always you're going to add a zero. I mean, it's going to be a big number. And when we go through the feasibility study and the CapEx part, that's always where that's the, okay, now let's shrink the circle. Let's look at what we can do. But you want to find out what that real cost is. Also, if you're going to apply for grant money, you don't want to apply for 19.6 million when you find out it's really 26.6 million, right? So you need to do just enough engineering in there to make sure you feel comfortable. And that kind of falls into that third box of the application development. We can work with you. Like Adrian mentioned, there's a number of consulting companies, but you're going to want to go through that application development because it is competitive. I would argue we're very good at getting money. We have lots of good clients to talk about that story, but you need to have very concrete financials with a very defined engineering plan. When I say very engineering defined plan, you don't do a whole lot of engineering because you don't want to spend money engineering the whole thing, but you have to be confident enough that with that number. But you need to have a concise application. As we've gone through, not just in Illinois, but other states, kind of the first, we'll tell every client all the time, if there's multiple rounds, get in the first round because nobody's figured it out yet and they're trying to make some awards. And if you go in with a good application, you're going to be awarded. That gets harder and harder as you go further along because more people are getting engaged. As evidenced just in Illinois, where we batted 1,000 in the first round, and the second round 42. We batted 420 in the second round. Bigger rounds, but you need to be more concise on that. And then a big jump, taking a really big jump to the build out and compliance. Depends on the model. There's a number of different models Gigi talked about. Most of the ones we do in Illinois have generally been the providers maybe working with the community, but they're building it out themselves. And Jesse will talk about that here in a little bit. But once you get through that build out and along the way, there's going to be a tremendous amount of project management and compliance. You don't want to look at compliance requirements when you're done. You need to go in ready to go on the compliance part. In Illinois, we have quarterly calls to make sure everything's in order, and there's audits, and Jesse may be able to attack this as well. But make sure you're going in knowing what you're going to have to do on the backside. And then I put that last thing in there that says, then what? We've seen lots and lots of clients, and this is especially true in the electric cooperative space, where their goal was to serve their member. We want to serve our member with residential local broadband. Amen. Awesome. Love it. Great. There's a tremendous backside. And this is what I mentioned about the municipal utilities. Once you've got that fiber asset in the ground, I don't want to say it's unlimited, but the opportunities beyond that, there's value there that's unrecognized. And we have a leadership group on the electric cooperative side nationally, Jesse's part of it, where that question comes up every time of what else can I do? Pick on Michigan. Gigi, you said you're working in Michigan. Wolverine, the generation transmission cooperative in Michigan, they've got a 432 fiber going down the long axis of the state. It's 100 and some miles. They're only using 24 fibers. They've got over 400 fibers of available cable. So then what? And that's part of the thing we do with clients, but you're not going to stop at building a residential broadband. Maybe it's smart grid, utility automation, a smarter town, middle mile opportunities that we mentioned with Utopia. So there's a long way to go. Hopefully I've been helpful in terms of the steps along the way, but I'm happy to answer any questions after Jesse's done. I can be in here as long as you want, but because of the breadth of the group, there's questions that are going to be all over the board, and I can answer them as best as I can.
Thank you, Kevin. That's just, I appreciate the brevity and I also appreciate you making yourself available.
Oh, for sure.
Because again, I think both you and the Reid Consulting Group sort of follow a similar process. And Tom, as I said, we have a list of people that we feel are really good players in this
Yeah.
space. Tom, do you have anything that you want to add to or supplement Kevin's presentation? Don't mean to put you on the spot, but why not?
I think Kevin did a good job explaining the process, very similar process to what we follow. Of no point getting into the detailed engineering until we figure out whether it's you have the financial appetite. So enough engineering that you can figure out, a rough sense of the costs, and then the pro forma to figure out whether it's going to make sense for you. I've worked with Vantage Point before with other clients, and I find them to be a really excellent team.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think, guys, I mean, just as a commercial, a little bit, Adrian, guys, I mean, I'm blowing smoke up my own skirt here a little bit, but people like Reid and Vantage Point, we're not going anywhere. We've been here. I mean, I'm not on the board of the Broadband Association because I came in for the fast box. So there's places that you can go to that are admirable resources that just sometimes it might be a case of, hey, Kevin told me all of this. Hey, Tom, is he lying to me? Take that second set of eyes for sure and use the resources that Benton's got available to you because you may just need different ones for different pieces. But,
Well, and you make a really good point, Kevin, that there have been so many companies rushing into the broadband consulting space. They think there's these huge paydays, and for some people like McKenzie, all of a sudden, decided they were a broadband shop, and scooped up a lot of the state broadband funding.
We're going to be here, and I think that the highlight of the show is the one you guys get to speak next, the kind of the work in progress and the finished project. But I'm available if you need it. I'll hang on till the bitter end.
Thank you, Kevin. And what we'll do is when we do the follow-up email, we'll present the slides, the recording, and people's contact information.
Sure.
So I do want to turn to now Jesse Shackleton. You can see we've started big. We kind of get down here, and now we're getting to a real specific. And Jesse, I'm always thrilled when you join us. So again, are you sharing your slides, or is Reid doing it for you?
I will be sharing my slides.
There you go.
So
Okay.
I'll make an attempt here, and thank you, Adrian, for the great introduction, and thank you, everyone, for the opportunity to be here. So I'm going to make an attempt here to bring this over. Hopefully this all goes. All right. How'd I do? Are we seeing the presentation?
There you are.
Excellent. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Jesse Shackleton. I am the Director and General Manager of Broadband here at JCE Co-op. So, yeah, a lot of great conversation to date. I know Gigi talked about the different models out there. So we are that co-op model. So what I like to say in 1939, helped bridge what then was the electric divide throughout rural America. And so that's our success story. But it's not over because here we are. I feel like we're Act 2. Because we are local member owned, we listened and engaged with our membership quite often. And we heard very loud and clear, several years ago, in fact, in the early 2000s, that there was a need for rural broadband. So we made an attempt at it. Our first swing was to partner with somebody, and the most viable option at the time from prior cooperative leaders is we went on a venture down the fixed wireless path. And up in Northwest Illinois, if you've been here, it's beautiful country, but it's hills and trees, and that plus fixed wireless doesn't work real well for something called ubiquitous coverage. So we did a pivot in about 2016. We partnered with Vantage Point through a couple of feasibilities and a pilot project. And then that was the start of our venture into the fiber initiative. We felt then, and we still do today, feel strongly, even more so now, that fiber is that future-proof network that's going to give our members the best return on their investment moving forward. And that investment isn't just the dollars and cents. I think this slide right here is priceless, in my opinion. It's that value on that right-hand side and how we get there. I think Gigi and Kevin alluded to some of the funding that's out there, and it's a plethora. what you see here is from the GAO's website. They put together that mosaic there on that lower left. And the solid circles there, those are the programs that we, the co-op, have been directly engaged in building out, being awarded and building out these different funding programs. The ones in the dashed are areas that we've either looked at intently or maybe applied for some but didn't quite get them, but continued to stay engaged in those arenas. And then really you look at all that funding and how do you put this chessboard that's out in front of you? You have to have all the pieces together, right? You have to have communities that need it and want it. You have to have community leaders that are willing to take that step forward and roll up their sleeves and put in the just an intense amount of elbow grease that goes into this. And by the way, a shout out to everybody on this call, because I know that looking by titles and entities represented, one thing we all have in common is, yes, we all like to get a paycheck in our day jobs and everything else, but even our day jobs, and you look at what we do, we're here because we care about our communities, our memberships that we serve. And so I think that right there is step one. And then secondarily, we're here. We're taking time out of our busy days to really try to help each other and try to ultimately get this divide closed because there's a long ways to go. So I'm here today to really talk about some of the successes that we've done. If you can glean some lessons learned from me, great. All for that. The key inputs in the upper left on this, the community engagement. I know the Illinois Office of Broadband, the Illinois Broadband Lab, a phenomenal team of experts, and the knowledge base is so awesome at those two entities, and we've worked very closely with them. So utilizing their resources, but then, you know, that grassroots effort as a co-op, I mean, that's how we were built. That's how we exist. And so for us, it was all about that community engagement and what Illinois Office of Broadband, the Broadband Lab might call listening sessions throughout the state. We do that locally, and I'm sure you all on the call do as well to a certain degree. Just me, myself, in the last 4 years, I've probably been in front of locally in that little service area up there in 3 counties. I think I've attended nearly 100 different types of meetings, whether it's village board meetings, city councils, chamber of commerce, county boards, et cetera, committees. So it's getting out there, right? You really have to get out there and meet the people where they are and listen. And my wife constantly reminds me there's a reason God gave me 2 ears and only 1 mouth. So be a good listener out there. And so we listen, and from that, we started to develop these really these synergies, and we all wanted the same thing. And the last thing I'll mention on this and the community engagement was when you talk to the counties, for example, and for those of you that represent counties on the call, you all have a comprehensive plan. And so we dove into that, and it's a big, long, multi-year endeavor to create a comprehensive plan. But somewhere in there, there's this thing called telecommunications, right? And maybe it used to say telecommunications, and a lot of them might even say fiber now. So we made sure to engage our counties, and that helped to create the scope of where we were going in terms of our demarcations, because we had our legacy electric footprint. But I think one of the things that Adrian and the team wanted me to talk about today is we went outside of that footprint, and it's like, how big do we go? And like Kevin said, cast a wide net. So we looked at all that funding that was out there. We looked at all the maps and resources available to us. And we did. We talked to our counties. So, well, it makes sense to go county-wide and then look at each of the counties that we serve. And let's go for it. And so that was an approach that we took early on. Make sure I can change my screen. There you go. All right. So this is another... I know the Fiber Broadband Association partnered with Corey here. They created this report, and I think I have it referenced there, and we can work with Reid and company to get this out there and make it available. But these are just some of the numbers that are out there in a report that's just recent in the last year or two. And when you look across this and you think about, okay, now your local area, if you do accomplish a build out like what we're doing, we have a lot of our areas built out. We're at 7,000 fiber subscribers currently. We're on our way in the next 3 years to hopefully be somewhere between 15 and 20,000 subscribers in our little Northwest pocket, and then fully deployed with full utilization and really good take rates that we continue to see, which means the people are using it and they need it. We hope to be between 25 and 30,000 in the next 5 years. But these numbers right here, you take those 25,000 to 30,000 folks, and you start to add these numbers on top of it. This is what really matters. At the end of the day, it's not even about the fiber and these networks. It's about what the people do with it to drive rural prosperity. And it's not just folks in the country. I mean, rural is a small town, right? And there's some metro areas, right, that are pockets that are definitely unserved and underserved that can realize some of these same benefits. So what I'm going to show you a couple slides, and what I did is I presented to our board of directors, and I said, okay, here's 3 of the counties that we're really aggressively building out in our area, and we took some data from the Federal Reserve Bank, and so we looked at, okay, if we take those numbers that were on the last slide and we drive, with full adoption out there, we're looking at increasing the median household, the median income by $2,000. Take Whiteside County. That's our more populous county because they have a couple of larger communities that don't qualify for grants or considered served, but they have a population of about 52,000. And let's just say even half of that, just easy math, 25,000 people, that would be 18 and above of that working age, and the majority of them, out in the workforce. And if you can increase each one of those annual salaries by $2,000, that generates another $50 million that are getting put on somebody's check that they're going to reinvest into the local economies. And then they become net contributors ultimately over time as we start to see this growth and adoption go forward. So again, what I'm showing you guys right now is this is what puts gas in our tank here, right? This is what we're striving for. It's not about us, it's about the folks and each of these households and what they do with it. On the right-hand side, the GDP, again, we took our 3 counties, and if you look at that, that's $500 million. If we would have gone back over 5 years and say we would have had full deployment of fiber and full adoption rates and utilization by the folks with really good take rates, and they were all using it for their various purposes, just in those 3 counties alone, we could have added another $500 million to the GDP locally. So again, Gigi hit on some of those economic impacts as well. This is an interesting one, again, kind of honing in on some economic development stuff, but 10-year business growth. And these slides right here, we just took and said, hey, look at what's been happening, especially in the 2 top counties there, Whiteside and Carroll. We saw a pretty significant decline from 2014 to 2024. And then you see Joe Davis County down at the bottom, and that kind of held steady and actually saw a little bit of an increase where the other 2 didn't. The reason? That there's a lot of lake communities. It's more residential and tourist driven in Joe Davis County, where there's more industry, industrial and commercial in those other 2 counties. So there's a lot more volatility in the job markets there and businesses, whether they're moving out of state or out of country. And so our hopes are, again, going back to that other slide, that we can turn this around. And again, I'm not going to talk about population that was mentioned, but yes, population, the question was asked about, do we look at the populations? Well, we certainly have a density factor that we look at, and that all factors into your feasibility. But really, you can never eliminate risk. You can only reduce it. And as Gigi said, I think the benefits far outweigh the risk if we can get these deployments out there. Our hopes are that the density goes up because we turn out migration to in migration. And if we do a good job of marketing, what we're doing, hopefully you'll see that. This was recently a little infographic that was recently published through our National Trade Association, NRECA, and I thought it did a really good job. On that right-hand side, you heard Gigi talk about it, and I apologize if it's a little small on the screen, if you can zoom in, but you can see like grant program speed minimums, and Gigi, Kevin, and Tom, everybody knows this, that deals with writing applications. When you go out there and you start to screen your areas, the BEAD funding talks about minimum speeds. BEAD's 100 by 20. Reconnect was 100 by 100. The Connect American RDOF programs were the lowest tier you could apply for was a 10-1 and a 25-3. So that creates a lot of dynamics. And then when you couple that with the current maps and trying to stay accurate with what's committed, what's built, it can be very dynamic. And that just kind of goes back to what everybody else talked about. Find a trusted partner, especially on the consultant side on writing these grants and helping you vet and filter through all these dynamics. But I will say this on the infographics, what we care about, the people in the homes, the businesses there, at the top, all these different value stack services that are all enabled because of fiber. Again, that's our opinion. We are very much taking fiber as deep into our rural networks as we can go. The businesses, there's a blurred line between a business and a residence. I mean, there's a lot of Fortune 500, even Fortune 100 companies that the CFO and or their key staff, like the controller of a Fortune 500 company, isn't in the brick and mortar building in a major metro area. They're in a farmhouse in some rural area served by a co-op or somebody else or a small community. And so essentially the service and the latency that they need for big file transfers and access to the cloud and security and all that stuff, they are essentially an extension of that Fortune 500 company on day-to-day business. So I always tell our teams, don't make an assumption that just because it's a single family home, that's not a key business and it might not need the same level of speeds and latency and securities that an office building might need. So again, kind of rounding out here, the co-op team for us, I mean, it's any key stakeholder. As Gigi mentioned, our model is, we're a co-op, we're member owned. For us, we're not even there. There's roughly 900 electric co-ops nationwide, and there's other co-ops. There's telephone co-ops out there that have been in business as long as we've been doing electric, since 1939, and some longer than that. But at the end of the day, everybody is a Class A voting member of the co-op, one member, one vote. It's that local democratic control, that simple co-op model. It's very grassroots focused. It's not for profit. We can probably tolerate a longer payback on the financial side than what a for-profit could. And so instead of a 3 to 5 year and some sort of potential equity flip in the future, no, we're going to be here. We've been here 86 years. We're going to be here another 86 years, continuing to own and operate, quality, affordable, and reliable services to our membership. And one last thing, I will say, just to give some credibility to the core team, because we've been so good at engaging with our local stakeholders. As I mentioned, all those meetings I was at. To date, we've had basically what I call directly 15 grant awards to date. We've had 2 Community Connect through USDA, so federal grants. We've had 1 Reconnect, again through USDA as well. We've had 11 Connect Illinois grants also. And then 1, I call it a grant, but it was really a partnership, if you will, $3 million ARPA dollars from one of our counties who felt it was important to help boost that build out in their area. And that was applied as matching funds towards our Connect Illinois grants. So, and then indirect, again, all that stuff on that right hand of the screen, we didn't directly apply, but we worked with the local, workforce development. If all this build out in Illinois comes to fruition with all the funding that's been available or allocated to the state, right now there's over 2,000 new jobs, good paying jobs that could be created just in the broadband sector. And that doesn't count any of the other GDP. You name the business, bring in a business and name whatever industry it's in. I mean, there's so much growth potential here. But we worked to get an apprenticeship expansion grant with a local tech college, and we've launched a broadband tech program there, and also created a Department of Labor approved apprenticeship program for a broadband technician. We worked with our G&T, Generation Transmission Co-op, Darrell and Power out of La Crosse, and we helped write letters of support and help them kind of craft and participate in their application, and they were awarded approximately a $30 million middle mile grant. Middle mile's key because it keeps our last mile build connected to data centers at a lower cost, which helps ensure longer term affordable costs as long as we can continue to manage our wholesale side of things. And then really a fun one is we worked with the AARP Senior Planet program. So we've launched that, and that's working with the older demographic, and we do have a pretty significant percentage of older demographic membership. And they basically are our small team of trained instructors, if you will, go around, and they're just on rotation, and they're just on tour, and they just go back to all these different libraries and community areas, and we teach people how to safely. Sometimes it's just a matter of how to use a computer. Sometimes it's how to safely do safe banking online, how to avoid phishing scams, how to look at over-the-top video and navigate that arena. So it's been wildly popular. In fact, every time they go back to another location, which they're on their third tour, every time they go back, the room gets more full and more full. So that's been really fun to see. And I think that just really kind of shows that what we're doing is making a difference in the quality of life. So I think with that, I believe that concludes my presentation.
Oh, Jesse,
Stop.
thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's such the icing on the cake, as I said, to go big picture, then talk about how you get there, and then how it really plays out at the local level. And the part of the reason, as I said, that Jesse is my favorite provider is that last part of the presentation you heard, really getting down to how do you get people to subscribe, adopt broadband. We were on a call yesterday with Lake County with all their digital navigators in attendance. And these are the people who are literally going to take that message of what broadband can do and get people online. And it's a very holistic picture. So, next week, we're going to talk about that adoption side. The other thing, of course, is the job development that can be put together around building these networks, making sure people are trained. And so that kind of work also helps with the local economy. So we have a couple of questions from my favorite smart person in this group, Heather Hampton-Nodal. God, Heather, I just love it. But I think you heard that part of your question, what is a realistic return on investment in years 1 through 2, 3 through 5, and beyond? One of the reasons we love the cooperative model is, as Jesse said, we can take a little longer to have that return on investment, even up to 10 plus years, we've heard over time, whereas a network that, as Gigi describes, is much more interested in getting an immediate return on investment for shareholders might be looking at 2 to 3 years. So I think that's good. But let's look at the rest of Heather's question. Are there rules that govern the electric footprint of the cooperative, but appear not to apply on broadband, but may have on telecom with traditional LANs? Jesse, I think that's probably a question for you.
Sure. Yeah, on the electric co-op side, there are no current laws in the state of Illinois that prevent us from expanding our service area on the broadband side. That's different on the electric side, and then we also have a natural gas division too, but we're not going to mix that in. But we on the broadband side, there is nothing currently in Illinois that prevents that. And I don't know, Kevin might know better on like the telco side, what rules are in play from and I know you said a LAN side, it might be like an ILEC or a CLEC type of
exactly
position. So I don't know if you want to speak to that.
On the telco side, that'd be exactly what it is. The ILEC defined area versus the CLEC area.
Okay. So a CLEC area basically would be, you can expand outside of that, but your ILEC area is your ILEC area.
Right, for broadband.
Yep.
And then, Jesse, if you could share the broadband tech curriculum at the Workforce Center and other levels or their contacts. I know you were working with a local community college, am I right?
Yeah, Morrison Tech in Morrison, Illinois is where we launched the program. And so, yes, and we utilize the Fiber Broadband Association's Optic Path program. So I'd be happy to share that.
That'd be great. You can send that information to Reid and he'll put that out with the follow-up email. Do I have any other questions from anybody else? While we have a few more minutes left. And I know that There are, it's really interesting. I do want to say that again, yesterday we had the opportunity to talk to Lake County, which of course has 700,000 people and has no co-ops that we were aware of, and so is a completely Comcast territory, or at least that is the predominant, and when I say predominant, I'm underlining cable modem provider. But I will say there are discussions, or at least there were opportunities to create fiber overbuilds in this place. Fiber hoods is what Tom and his team call them, which means that providers could come in and justify the expense because of the density of the population. And I would just love to hear from the group about what they think about doing that kind of strategy. I think probably McHenry is our other very populated place that might look at an alternative like that. But even in some of our smaller counties, there are some of these towns that could be strung together along a road like we call the Pearl, Tom calls the Pearl Necklace approach. Just love to hear what you think about that.
Well, Adrian, you called me out, so I'll go ahead and start.
Good.
Yeah, we looked at that about 4 years ago, and it was just the politics weren't there, was our issue. We didn't want to own or manage the fiber, but we did put a plan together for like a $25 million broadband backbone right up the middle of the county. But it really got a lot of providers, probably 3 times the number we've ever heard of, come out of the woodwork and say, hey, you don't need, I'm paraphrasing here, but said, hey, oh, no, you don't need to do that. We're here and we'll be here and we're going to put stuff in. And half of them have been true to their word. We've just seen things start to grow even without Connect Illinois or BEAD funding. And I guess that's just a long way of saying the board gave us the direction. No, we want the providers in here. If they're connecting people, that was their focus.
So if there aren't other questions, I'd love to pick Jesse's brain a little bit.
Sure.
I really like what, the economic impact aspect. I think you're right on with that. And when we did that analysis, we extended a little further to say, how long does it take to pay the government back for the investment in tax revenues? And it looks like 6 or 7 years. As the GDP grows, tax revenues grow. And but I was curious, you said you've moved outside of your own territory with broadband a little bit. How much does that affect your financial pro forma? Because we work with a rural electric cooperative, and they've been hesitant to go outside their area because, things like Make Ready. But when they're inside their own territory, the Make Ready is improving their own physical plant. They move off into somebody else's physical plant. Now they're spending money that's, improving somebody else's physical plant. I'm just curious how you make that judgment call and how much it affects your pro forma.
Yeah, great question. And I think at the end of the day, you look at those inputs into the feasibility. And for us, when we go off of our footprint, we go exclusively underground in the road right away, just like a more traditional ISP would. So that has been our build out area. In fact, when we're all said and done, we'll probably be about 50-50 aerial versus underground. We started out aerial, but because we're in hills and trees, I think Kevin brought up the term grid resiliency. We've actually, even in our service area, we started to go underground, and we're utilizing kind of that dig once approach and minimizing environmental impact. We're actually able to bring our electric out of the trees in the back 40 and bring it up in and put it in with the fiber. So now we're doing one excavation and building out the fiber network that's needed to these unserved, underserved areas, in addition to enhancing our electric resiliency as well. So
that's fantastic.
So again, all those feasibilities kind of get baked into it. So, but at the end of the day, yes, even as a co-op, or no matter what your model is, finances are finances, and you certainly have to meet your minimum debt service coverages and everything else. So I think as long as you can pencil it out, and the leadership, in our case, the board, and the financial gurus, if you will, as long as those paybacks and those terms, as long as we can float the boat, so to speak, because we're not profit driven, right? But we do have to cover costs to operate and maintain. And as long as those look good, then we're going to go as far and deep as we can to these folks that need it.
That's fantastic.
So Jesse, I want you to comment on the fact that I may not have my numbers right, but I think you know this. There are 24 electric co-ops in
Yep,
Illinois, but only 4 are in the broadband business.
that's correct. Yep.
Wow.
Can you speak to why there aren't more people, your compatriots, that are in this business? We, for instance, were talking with McLean County and a prior,
Sure.
and there's Corn Belt Electric, which just has a huge footprint in central Illinois. And
Yep.
at this point, they just have not really said they're interested. And Kevin, I'm sure you're going to have something to say on that too.
Yeah. Well, my 2 cents on it would be, knowing our other, peer co-ops very well, that I think they look at it and they look at that business plan and that risk because they're looking at who's out there for competition, for example, or other providers. Even if it's not, it might be our first cousins on the telephone co-op side. For us, we were a little bit unique. We were kind of way up in this northwest pocket. And we really didn't have, because we would, trust me, one of the first things we did is we're an electric co-op. Like how do we run a telecom? Kind of like whether you're a local, a county or a city, and you're like, holy cow, if we stand this thing up, we do have to, just like Gigi and Kevin spoke to, you have to be eyes wide open. You have to stand up that whole division and all the people and things it takes to run it. And so we thought twice. We were looking to partner with somebody, and then kind of through our fixed wireless piece, we had a couple of people on staff that kind of had a decent communications background. And so that's what we launched our division here at the co-op with. Other co-ops throughout the state, I think there's a lot of existing providers that are in those areas. And as we get deeper into these rounds, I think they have, as Kevin said, become more and more competitive. And so I think they might be looking to maybe, rather than own it, maybe potentially support it.
Kevin, do you have anything to add on this?
Yeah, a couple different thoughts. Just nationally, there's about 900 electric cooperatives and about 250 that are doing broadband. So a quarter-ish are engaged in broadband. So Illinois, from just a numbers perspective, would be behind. I think specific to Illinois, and we've done a number of feasibility studies for electric cooperatives in Illinois, so it's not a lack of looking. I can tell you that for sure. But downstate and Western Illinois are served by a lot of telephone cooperatives, which are largely well served in some of those areas. So now to back that back into the electric cooperative side, and pick on Corn Belt because I'm kind of familiar with their serving area, but they've got the same challenge that a lot of electric cooperatives do nationally, where they might have parts of their area that are rather dense, that are well served, in other areas where they've got 1 or 2 people per mile, one or 2 meters per mile, where it's just really, I mean, it'll never pencil ever without a significant amount of grant funding. The co-op boards are faced with, well, do we serve everybody? That's generally the first hurdle they've got to get over is, are we going to serve everybody? Or are we going to tell somebody, hey, Mary, you're in the northern part, you're well served, so we're not coming. But Fred in the southern part, we're only going to come serve you. And that's a really big hurdle to get over. The second one off of that is for all these electric cooperatives that generally do fall on the side of serving everybody, which I think is the right thing to do. But it's like taking your balance sheet and adding, if not doubling, it's at least another 80% on your balance sheet. You're gonna double the size of your co-op. It's a big investment. So those are big numbers that they're big to get over. And then also a lot of, and I used to do this presentation about the myths of what telephone companies think about cooperatives. And one of them that with this myth was that, oh, the electric cooperatives are just electric. They're full of money. They're flush with cash. They don't know what to do. It's like, no, they're not. They're not. And they have the same, whether you're a cooperative or a commercial company, you still have to make this thing pencil and you've got to pay it back. And if you go get a $80-100 million, I mean, Jesse, what'd you get? Like 96 million in grant money? It's 125 million-ish. That's a really big number. That it takes a lot of, I think, Adam, you talked about the political will and in McHenry County, it just takes a lot of guts to say, yeah, we're gonna go borrow $125 million and build that's big, right? So
Right, if it's a loan versus a grant. I will say that we've had an incredible provider from Missouri whose territory touches Illinois, a guy named Ryan Johnson from Chariton Valley, and they are originally a telephone co-op that through 35 grants has edged out their territory beyond their original, their original footprint. And I always admire their strategy, because when we ask them, how on earth do you, apply for all these grants and do the compliance? That's Kim's job, by the way, here at RCG. But, the issue is, the guy just looked at us and said, I just love applying for grants. And it does take that kind of fire in the belly to say, I'm going to go after this money, and I can pencil, as you said, Kevin, to make it happen. But I brought our guests on today to give everybody a sense, particularly in rural areas, that there are a lot of different ways to go here. And I hope that by having our guests on today, we've just given you a sense that you could, of course, and should talk to your local incumbent providers, but there may be options to go outside what we consider the norm and talk to smaller providers or telephone or electric co-ops, and just look beyond, and also to think about whether the kind of investment, if you have leftover, I don't think anybody has leftover ARPA funds. I think you have to spend them all, or have to spend them all by the end of this calendar year. But certainly there are counties that have decided to get in it and not run the network, but to invest in a public-private partnership. Gigi, I see your hand up, and I hope you'll wrap us up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that sometimes the mere issuance of a request for proposals or something like similar that seeks out a possible public broadband build gets the incumbents to come to the table and say, what do you need? What do you need that I'm not providing? So that happens a lot. So that's something that can get you what you need without having to spend a penny.
And I completely agree with that, Gigi. I have seen incumbent providers come to the table and say, oh, you want ubiquitous service? Oh, you want the low-cost broadband plan? Nothing like telling them they're going to have competition to get you to sort of get the firm to make some compromises. And I see Adam saying that's exactly what happened in McHenry. Yes. When you go out there and say, I'm going to build something right down the middle of my county, I just can't even imagine how many people were right there saying, oh, wait a minute, I'll do it, right? Okay, guys.
I just want to pile onto that one real quick.
Sure, please pile.
Yeah, and if the incumbent provider comes in and builds because you said you're going to do it, amen, brother. That mission accomplished. But I would add to that, we work with a lot of rural providers in Illinois. That's the kind of thing that as you're having discussions with the ISPs over the next couple of weeks, if you can go to them and say, here's what I want, I'm willing to go to the bat for this, ABC, whatever those different bullet points are, the providers might say, wow, you really have your crap together, right? You know what you want. That makes it a lot more enticing for me to come to your area and build. So if you can have kind of your ducks in a row on what you want to accomplish. If Kevin's broadband might come and say, hey, I'm thinking about going to McHenry County, but I didn't really know how much effort it was going to be, but Adam's got his stuff together. That makes it a lot easier to go.
And that's why we did the surveys, because sometimes when people say, I have lousy service, it's not doing the trick for me, telehealth, working from home, whatever the reasons, or my current provider sucks and, I'd be willing to switch. Those are indications that there's a subscriber base available for these providers to come in and pick up. So again, just to tie all the various elements of this program together, we're making you do the surveys because it really does help the providers quantify interest in your county. So just building off Kevin. Okay, guys.
Thanks.
10:31, here we go. Thank you again so much to our guests and for the people who hung in there. We had a good solid 40 people and a lot of good county representation. Just really appreciate everybody. And we'll see you all next week at the same time to talk about our adoption and inclusion with wonderful guests, not only from Benton, but from the Illinois offices. So again, really appreciate all of you. Thank you so much. Take care.
Great.
Thanks, everybody.
You guys.